Hello, welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So this week we're taking a look at this album and I'll be musing over this sort of period in music for when it came out, so 2010, and as I always do, thinking about what I was actually listening to at the time and the musical backdrop that this rests against, I suppose. It's an interesting year, and I'm going to blend into this various stuff about what I was doing in 2010, because it's a pretty pivotal year for me outside of music. So long-term viewers of the channel probably already know that 2010 would have been my first full year in Nova Scotia. I came over the very end of, or mid-December 2009, and that's when I actually landed, as they call it. So I came over with my special visa and a number of items I'd been sort of bringing over slowly, mainly clothes. But on that particular trip in 2009, I remember having 2 items of hand luggage and 2 checked in pieces of luggage. And I think both of the hand luggage actually had laptops in them as well, because I didn't want to ship those. I did ship my main sort of PC because I'd shipped a load of gear in, the end of 2009, a large amount of my personal belongings and CDs and other items that I couldn't obviously bring on the plane. 2010's interesting because that was my first full year. Initially, in that first sort of 3 months or less, I remember having to retake my driving test because at that point they weren't offering a straight like-for-like exchange with driving licenses. So I had a full UK licence since I think around 1982. So it was funny having to retake my test for my Canadian licence in 2010. And I remember actually having to sit a written exam as well, because back when I took my test, all of that stuff was actually done as part of the driving exam. After you finished driving, the examiner would ask you questions. So by the time we get to 2010, we're full on two parts of the driving exam, what they call the written test, which effectively you take on computer, and then the actual driving test, and I had to do both. The one thing I didn't have to do is I didn't have to do that probationary, however many lessons it is. So I didn't have to do that. So that was interesting. 2010 was when I also was lining up a job, because the self-employment thing I was going to do, having previously done in the UK, didn't really work out as expected. So I decided to go back to being employed for a number of years. So it's a really interesting year to try and examine, what was going on, what was I listening to musically, because I'd come from, obviously being exposed to whatever was going on in the UK, music-wise, and driving around while I was working for myself in the UK, visiting clients, listening to the radio. Also, during that period, I switched over to streaming. We had early Spotify in the UK at that point, so I was actually able to still run my Spotify account, because it was a premium account, but in Canada, even though it wasn't available in Canada. So that was handy. Slowly shifting over to digital only consumption of music. So it was in 2010. Now, as is the case with all the albums I feature in this album in particular, I didn't listen to until a lot later, probably mid 2010s actually, thinking about it. And I went on a bit of a jag And by then Spotify was fully available in Canada, so I just switched over to the Canadian version because it was cheaper, and I was able to absorb a whole ton of music that I hadn't done at the time. And this was one band and one album. So as I go through, I'm going to try and remember what maybe clued me into this band a lot later. But as I've said, like with all these episodes, I always feature an album that I wasn't big into when it came out, got big into later, and that gives me an excuse to sort of reflect on, that relationship between whatever my musical zeitgeist was at the time, and then versus what it might have been, or the sort of options open. So let's have a look. 21st of May 2010 this came out. So some clue as to there's a couple of things that ultimately that ended up me listening to this band in particular. Probably three main things. Sometime in the 2010s, I started to check out drum and bass again, and I was just wondering where it had gone, like musically. Had it gone a bit like one of those genres, like different feel, but I always think of metalcore as being an interesting genre because it's like absorbed so many different other genres into it over the years. And metalcore, as I listened to it around the time I discovered it, I suppose when I was sort of listening to from crossover and then to bands like Earth Crisis, and then how much it's changed since Earth Crisis. I think I was just curious, and I can't remember the exact reason why in the 2010s, but I was curious as to what drum and bass had absorbed, because interestingly enough, there were bands that were in the metalcore genre that had absorbed elements of electronic music and drum and bass into them. So maybe I was, in checking out that in the 2010s, because I know I was listening to bands like Architects in the 2010s, and I wonder whether I was doing the sort of reverse thing. So if we just have a quick look to see and refresh my memory. So the debut was Hold Your Colour, and what I remember ending up doing is sort of working my way back. So starting off with Immersion, In Silico, and then Hold Your Colour. And then the other thing that had clued me into the band, and I'll include a link to this, is there's a video on YouTube, it's pretty old now, of a Brixton gig they did, where they did their track, so they've got the track Slam, which I think is on the first album. Yeah. But as a prefix to Slam, they do this little segment, well, say little segment, it's about 1 minute and a half of Master of Puppets by Metallica, like a really good cover of it. Super heavy. It's got the drum and bass in it. I don't know if anybody else has checked it out that's watching this video. I'll include a link to that. So there was that. And then also when I came to check out Immersion, I noticed that In Flames were on the track Self versus Self. And I'm a big fan of In Flames, and particularly like, the whole Swedish melodic death metal scene, so At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, those sort of bands. So that was really interesting. And there's a number of other collaborations on here. There's one with Liam Howlett from the Prodigy, and there's one from Stephen Wilson of Porcupine Tree fame. And it's a pretty long album. It's 97 minutes, I think, for the regular one. I remember many a bus trip spent listening to this. So it must have been at a time when the mobile version of Spotify, whenever that became available in North America through the Apple Store, through the App Store, because when I first came out here in 2010, you could still only get Spotify through a computer. You couldn't get it through like a device. So it was almost like a culmination of things. There's several other bands that as a result of suddenly me being able to listen to Spotify, on the bus through my iPad or iPod Touch, I think I had at the time. When I went on a bit of a jag with them, there was quite a number of post-rock bands, I think. I'm trying to think of that band now. That did... Is it If Trees Could Talk? I think they're called. And God Is an Astronaut was another one. So yeah, they've only ever had 3 studio albums out, and that was the last one. Interesting enough. What's the controversy? I was curious as what the controversy is, because you see, okay, what have they done? Oh, okay, so some sort of what would you call it? Beef with Goldie. Yeah, so I have. I do have this album. Where's it gone? Yeah, Timeless from '95. So yeah, it's around the time I was listening to drum and bass. Interesting. I should check that out. So they must have had some, because I must admit, beyond that real. It's funny, yeah. That's typical for me. Let's have a look. This is why I don't like doing these episodes, because I get into these bands sometimes right in the middle of a hiatus. I need to check that. So it was definitely after here. I reckon it was sometime here when I started listening to them. So when was that hiatus then? Okay, touring. So I wonder if it was. I do remember this, actually thinking about it. So I bet I had that happen where I thought, oh, this band are great, and then so I reckon it must have been sometime in 2012, and sort of locked into them, and then realised they're on hiatus. That's happened quite a few times for me. I've suddenly got big into a band and realised they've actually disbanded or they're on hiatus. I don't think it was as late as this. I mean, it's possible because of the 10-year anniversary. I suddenly sort of jumped into jumped into my vision, possibly. Not sure, actually. So, but probably no later than that. So let's go back to 2010 itself, because as I said, that bounced in straight. That album went straight in at number 1. So let's see what the sort of UK chart zeitgeist was at the time. See if because of course by time May comes around, I'm in Nova Scotia, so I wouldn't be listening to any UK radio at that point. So am I going to recognise? I mean, obviously there's bands here with international appeal, but I remember this album and this Florence and the Machine. Oh, and of course the Iron Man 2 soundtrack. Wow. Oh, Mumford and Sons. Of course Plastic Beach was out. Oh, this is terrible. In terms of chart stuff, I have no musical compass for any of this stuff. I mean, yeah, probably this, but I'm not familiar. I'm not sure what Biffy Clyro album I've listened to actually. Trying to remember what T-Star album I listened to, because they did a remix of Sarah McLachlan track, didn't they? Is it Silence? So I know that one. I have listened to that album. Oh, I remember this. So yeah, I was definitely listening to that at the time. My wife's a big Crystal Castles fan. I think we actually went to see them live somewhere. Wow. I do have this, I think, yeah. And I did see Muse a lot later on a trip to the UK, and it was probably... Oh, well, it definitely would have been pre-COVID. I reckon probably, 2017, maybe? It was whatever year that... Was it Drones came out? So whatever year that came out. That's when I went to see them at the O2. Wow. Yeah. Well, definitely my popular music lens, or my UK chart lens, was switched right off at this point in time, which is not surprising. So let's go through and slice this a bit differently using album of the year and see if I can... Okay, so this is a bit more familiar. So I recognise these albums. At this point, I wasn't listening to Ghost yet. That didn't happen until around the time of their next album, when I actually saw them in Toronto. That was a cool gig, actually, best gig I think I've ever been to, pretty much. And I've been to some cool gigs over the years. Yeah, that was really good. Very entertaining band. And I was listening to this album when it came out, the Alcest album. Yeah, I remember this album. Well, oh yeah, this. Now the other thing is, I was going to bring this up. The other thing I didn't mention is I was music blogging at the time, which was a sort of follow-on. So I've probably mentioned this before, but I was an early adopter of Mog, which is a social media platform for music, like blogging. There's at one point I'll go into the whole backstory around that if I haven't done it already. But as a sort of follow on from that, because Mog started to wrap up or turn into a different animal, and what I did between 2009 and 2010 is this, and on into the 2011s, is I created like my own music blog on WordPress to scratch that music blogging itch. Now, I haven't posted anything on here since... When was the date on this? Oh, 2023. I did... Alright, so I have been posting the odd thing. So yeah, some of my recent things have ended up on here. Mainly YouTube stuff. But prior to that, I was posting... So you can see I started in October 2009. We'll look at January 2010 in a moment. You can see I was posting all through 2010. And then sort of stopped. But I also had a number of pages that I created specifically for charts connected to publications. I'll include a link actually to this if anybody's interested. Let me go back to January. Okay. I was trying to keep up to date with stuff. So, oh yeah, Dark Fortress. So it's a mixed bag here. I was posting about, mainly new stuff, but also posting links to stuff that had come out, like, publications. In fact, one of my lists I reproduced on here from a publication, I think, is cross-linked in Wikipedia, because I don't think it's available anywhere else. Okay. Yeah, so I was still commenting about stuff from 2009. So, yeah, there's a bit of a mixed bag here, but I was trying to keep up to date with newer stuff. Yeah, so I was listening to, it's probably one of the few times where I was a little bit on the money, but for some reason, I don't remember. Yeah, becoming aware of that band. I think I was on a bit of a V&V Nation jag in 2010, to be honest with you. I think that was the main blindsiding. I was like on a retrospective jag, which had carried over from 2009. And I was still receiving Terrorizer issues as well in the mail. So a lot of what I posted about was being influenced by that. Anyway, I'll include a link to that, but I was just minded of that because I saw this and I did post something about this album. Different shining though, there's two shinings. These are a bit more sort of jazzy. But yeah, nothing really. It's interesting, isn't it? I don't remember listening to anything from here. I think there was, it might have come out the previous year. There was an album, and I haven't seen it here, which is the track on it's Hammer of the North, but I can't remember. The name of the band's escaped me, actually. It might come up when we go through some end of year lists. So, what about synth pop? Because I was listening to quite a bit of synth pop. So was my wife. So, yeah, I remember this. Now, there's some electronic stuff as well I was minded of as well, which is this album had come out and I was listening to this and some Salem. There's Pendulum, Immersion. This album by Bonobo, because I listened to it again this morning to check that I had listened to it. The Hot Chipper Band album that I'd already mentioned. And then this, which is a really cool album, which I listened to again this week, which is Small Craft on a Milk Sea. Brian Eno, John Hopkins and Leo Abraham's album. That's a really cool album. This one I remember, and I can never remember the order in which. So I have a copy of Junior, but I can never remember the order in which they came out. Maybe it was the previous year. Alternative rock. Anything from here that catches my eye? That I haven't thought about already. So it seems to be a bit of a combination, looking at this so far, of Alcest plus ambient plus some electronic stuff. I remember this, so I did listen to that. What else have we got? Just slightly different angle here. We're going to see some doubling up here because this is rock. Yeah, didn't listen to that at the time, as I already said. Same with the black keys. I sort of just I'd heard about them, but I didn't really get into them until I started watching that. I sort of saw that Black Keys rig rundown. I was listening to Two Door Cinema Club, but I don't know if it was this album. Post-punk. Oh yes, this. So yeah, I remember this coming out and going a bit of a... So yeah, that would have been 2010. So sort of reacquainting myself with Killing Joke. I had seen them, me and my middle brother, when I was still in the UK, had actually gone to a special gig where they played 2 nights, and I can't remember the venue, and they played like all their really, really early stuff. They had like the original lineup, and they played material from, what was it, the first 2 albums, and then various singles and a few other things thrown in for good measure. I've actually got the 2 gigs on CD. It was recorded. It was also recorded for video as well. So that must have been, I was trying to think, because I didn't go to many gigs in 2009 because I was sort of waiting for my visa to come through. So I was mindful of, I remember mindful of sort of booking to go and see any bands after about July of 2009, around that period. So really, yeah, anything. We did go to, I think, a couple of gigs at the very last minute, because at that point I was sort of serving out my, I was doing like an out of country immigration, so I'd been coming backwards and forwards to Canada over the course of about a year, and then decided to actually, because I needed to wrap my business up, it made more sense for me to, stay in the UK during the time when all the paperwork was being submitted. So I'd made a visit to Canada, a very long visit in July of 2009. Into July, actually. It was sort of May, June, I think, or June, July, maybe. And then my wife came over to the UK in October, and we did go and see, I think, at least 1 band on that visit, maybe 2 actually, and we made able to get some sort of tickets at the last minute. But yeah, I must have gone to see Killing Joke. I'm rambling a bit here because I'm trying to remember when that was. So I reckon I saw them in London at the latest early 2009, but possibly the previous year in 2008, whenever that gig was. So I was pretty pleased when in 2010 this album came out, because I'm not sure without looking it up actually, but I'm wondering if that was their first album after they reformed with the original lineup. Let me just have a quick look off screen. First year, I mean, 28 years to feature the band's original lineup, yeah. So it's funny because when I don't do massive amount of prep for these episodes deliberately, so you get this slightly rambly, me suddenly remembering stuff on top, because that's part for me of the fun of doing this. I find that if I do a ton of music research before I do these episodes. It actually puts me off doing the episodes. So, yeah. Punk albums. Wow, we've certainly got slim pickings in terms of stuff that I remember buying this because I'd seen Cancer Bats in... Well, I think I ended up seeing them quite a few times, but I did see them in 2008, just before the first time I ever came to Canada. So yeah, I saw them at a really cool. I think it was 5 bands. I haven't got a camera set up, so I can't show you, but I've got a really cool poster. It was May 2008, which is a limited edition printing of a gig they played in Brighton. It was Cancer Bats, Johnny Truant, Hexes, and there were a couple of other bands that weren't listed on the poster, that they sort of just were on that gig in Brighton. It was like an all ages. It was around the same time as the Brighton Festival, but it wasn't part of the Brighton Festival package, because I remember a number of people turning up thinking they'd be able to get in and being disappointed that they couldn't. And it was actually the first time I'd been into a gig in the UK where I had to wear a wristband because it was an all ages gig, and they were serving alcohol. And it was at a pub as well that had been sort of converted into a live venue, but I just don't remember the name of the place or who else played apart from Cancer Bats, Johnny Truant, and Hexes. Or do I? Ghost of 1000 played, because I've got a Ghost of 1000 t-shirt. So yeah, Ghost of 1000 played. So yeah, that was my first exposure to Cancer Bats, was that gig in 2008. So yeah, I was still listening to them at this point. And then I think we saw them again, actually probably in 2010. I think they played Halifax, probably an all ages gig at the Forum or whatever it was called. Was it? No, not the Forum. Oh, I'm trying to think of the venue there. I know it's next to the skate park in Halifax. Yeah, I completely forgot that this came out. I wasn't listening to it at the time. Owen Pallett. Now, I did see Owen Pallett in 2010, funnily enough. So, yeah. I think I saw him as part of the Halifax Pop Explosion, maybe. It was really cool. It was a church, so it's awesome acoustics. Right. And we've got... Where are we? Anything else here? I wasn't really keeping up with MGMT. I remember when I came over in 2008. That album, whatever came out around that time, was just being played so much. I'm on LPs. So we're just on the final thing here, just really me trying to mop up anything that I've not spotted. Let's go on to the second page thing, as it's all the album releases for Album of the Year. Yeah, so interestingly, not much. So let me just get some other clues. I've got a number of lists up here to just see if there was anything. Okay, so now I'm recognising something. That album, definitely. I listened to in 2010. Far I'd been listening to previously, but not this album. Same with Alkaline Trio. So this, oh, here we go. It was called Hammer of the North. So, yeah, I definitely listened to that album. I think that was one of the last CDs I ever had. Well, it was actually bought for me. For some reason, I don't think you could get it on Spotify, I seem to remember. Enemy, anything. I remember this band, and I'm trying to remember who I saw them supporting. In fact, that might have been... I wonder if they supported Bat for Lashes in Brighton in 2010. 2009, because I'd mentioned earlier that I didn't go to many gigs in 2009, but there was a couple maybe that I went to when my wife came over to visit, and it was the sort of last. So yeah, it was, because I remember that. I think that was either September or October, and then my visa came through a month later, and I was then getting everything ready. And then I sort of took December of 2000, the whole of like November of 2009 off, wrapped all my business up so I could spend time with my family in the UK. So I think it was Yeasay I was supporting, Bat for Lashes, and the other band I saw in 2009, just before I came out, would have been in Sephirum, I think. Yeah. So I don't know if they had anything out in 2010. Belle and Sebastian had an album out. I was listening to this as well this week. It's a pretty good album. If you've never checked out Belle and Sebastian and you really like sort of whimsical pop, check them out. Well worth it. And it's interesting to go through chronologically with that band. Yeah, I remember this album. I do have a Warpaint album, but I don't know. I don't know if it's in reaching distance. Hold on. What is this? So I've got the one with Love Is To Die on it, or whatever album that is. Is it just Warpaint by Warpaint? Probably. When did this come out? Doesn't say. You can't see me doing this. I'm just opening up. It's actually a very nice album. Can you hear the? Oops, got to be careful this because it's a double. Yeah. Anyway, the one I've got has got Keep It Healthy, Biggie, Disco, Very, all that sort of good stuff. So I don't think that is the album before. I think the one I've got is a bit later. Just putting it back in its sleeve. Bit of unintentional music related, album related ASMR. Or MRSA, or however it's pronounced. Right, Decibel. So apart from the heavy stuff that I've already flagged up, yeah, there's Kvalatech again. I definitely listened to that when it came out. Don't think I was listening to Nails at that point, but I'm not sure. And I remember, I don't know at what point I listened to the Triptykon album either. That's a really good album. Ghost. Did listen to this. I think I listened to that. That one. There was something a bit later down. I did mention this band I checked out. But yeah, that's about it. So it's interesting, isn't it? So mainly in summary, it would have been Alcest in combination with stuff that I'd got into because of my wife was listening to a lot of synth pop, plus all the electronic stuff I was listening to at the time. So yeah, interesting year in terms of my musical backdrop. How I didn't stumble upon Pendulum, I don't know. I remember this being really big. This track. I played it on the radio a lot over here. And I do remember there was a fairly controversial gig in Halifax where the Black Eyed Peas played, not because of anything that happened, but just because of the amount of money that it lost the city at the time for them to try and put it on. Oh, there's Immersion by Pendulum. If I remember at the end, I'm going to have to look up that album by Warpaint. I should do it. I should actually do an episode about them. Hopefully an album I can pick is an album I haven't covered already. What have we got here? Yeah, I'm completely out of touch at this point with any form of popular music. Wow. And as I said, the other thing as well, I think which was pulling me in a certain direction was the fact that prior to coming out, I'd been listening to tons of VNV Nation Assemblage 23, and I was just really on a VNV Nation jag in 2010, because that was a newer album had just come out, and there was you saw a blog post there I think for Compass as well, which I think was Assemblage 23. So that probably explains a lot. But again, I know I suppose it's quite a different genre, because I think at that point the term they were using for VNV Nation and Assemblage 23 I think was future pop. I think that's right. So yeah, it would have been not really the same not even remotely the same ballpark electronically as Pendulum. Not only because they started out as drum and bass, but then they got sort of super heavy. So yeah, that was an interesting one. I didn't quite know how this is going to pan out, because I flipped this at the last minute. I was going to do a 94 episode, which I also prepped for. But I decided to flip this over because I was out back of the house today doing some coding. It's really nice actually, outside, and for the ongoing Learn to Code, Code to Learn series. And I sort of started listening to some other stuff as well. So I prepped for this. But then realised that there was a certain, some things I wanted to talk about 2010, and while it was fresh on my mind, I should really do the 2010 episode. So, spoiler alert, there's going to be a 1994 Album Musings episode fairly soon, within the next few weeks after this goes out. So hopefully you enjoyed that. That was really interesting for me. Again, for lots of different reasons, but just because, I suppose, mainly because 2010 was such a pivotal change in my life. Suddenly, 2009, I'm in the UK, albeit also, from 2008, I suppose, coming backwards and forwards between the UK and Nova Scotia over the sort of course of a year and a half, 2 years nearly. And then 2010, boom, I'm landed and, having to retake my driving test and getting a job and, all that sort of stuff. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.